I'm Mike Massimino, a former NASA astronaut. I was with NASA for 18 years. My primary job was to be a spacewalker on the Hubble Space Telescope. And this is everything I'm authorized to tell you. Everyone says adios, and then they close the inner hatch and lock it. So now they're getting rid of all the air in the airlock until it goes down to vacuum. Even though I'd been in space for a couple days, I felt there was a really big difference between being inside of a spaceship and going outside of it. You know, like, that's space out there, man. The only thing that's protecting me is my spacesuit. And it was like this door, you know, like, that's the door to space. In the shuttle days, we had two categories of astronauts. We had astronaut pilots who were military test pilots or former military test pilots. And their primary job was to operate and fly the vehicle, land it, because it landed like a glider, like an aircraft on a runway. I was a mission specialist. My job was to do all the other stuff, do the spacewalks, work the robot arm, do the experiments, help with the systems of the space shuttle. My primary responsibility on both of my flights, though, was to be a spacewalker. My first mission, we trained for a year and a half. My second year, we ended up training for 2.5 years. It was only supposed to be a year and a half. You're training the whole time. As far as NASA's concerned, you're hired as an astronaut candidate, or as the experienced people like to call you, you're an ASCAN. Or where are the ASCANs? We need something done around here. And you don't get that title astronaut until you complete the training program, and then you successfully graduate from that. It usually takes about 2 years, and you get a silver astronaut pin. And then when you fly in space, you get a gold astronaut pin. So after being at NASA for 4 years, I was assigned to my first flight, and then it was about another year and a half after that until I flew that flight. For Hubble, it was learning about systems and also learning more about how the shuttle was going to be used for the flight. And then the spacewalk, you're training specific spacewalks and specific robotic operations for your flight. There's different facilities to do that, where there's an air-bearing floor where you're moving things around. It's kind of like an air hockey table, so the thing kind of floats, you're moving around. But it all comes together when you go to the pool. You'd get into your spacesuit and be put in the pool, and they would weigh you out, meaning that they would get the right amount of flotation and weights for you to be neutrally buoyant, meaning the force of gravity and the buoyancy force of the water kind of evens out, and you're floating in the water column, similar to the way you'll be floating in space. And then you run the spacewalk from start to finish. 100 feet wide, it's 200 feet long, and it's 40 feet deep. It's a really big pool. So the Hubble missions, they used to call us the prima donna crew. And everyone in the office would call, oh, you prima donnas. And I liked that. That was cool because, yes, we are special. And the reason they called us that is because of the support we had. It was a huge team of people, not only at the Johnson Space Center, but also from the Goddard Space Flight Center. So we had a lot of support. So back in the day when we were doing lots of spacewalks, building the space station and going to Hubble, they would have what we called dual ops. So you would have two crews in there. The training in the pool was really good to get you ready to do your job. I felt very prepared when I got to space at the end of my first spacewalk. I remember closing an equipment bay door and realizing that I felt like I had done that task 100 times, even though I had never been in space. The toilet on the shuttle required some training to just get your aim correctly, because it was a small hole on the commode. So you would pee into a hose, and that was pretty easy to do that. But the commode on the shuttle was a bit complicated and a very small opening. So the deal was you had to practice your alignment. And the way that worked is we had, in our simulator area, we had a toilet that worked just like the shuttle toilet. And so you could practice on that one. You could poop into that thing. You made sure you call them to tell them, hey, it's time to come service that. Because it wasn't a flush toilet. It would contain the material. So to practice for that, there was another toilet right next to it that you did not poop in, but that was like an alignment trainer. And that had a camera looking up through the hole. And it had a closed circuit TV right over here that they promised that was not going anywhere else. And then memorize that position on the toilet. Like, I felt, I'm riding a motorcycle. I felt like, all right, that was a feeling of kind of leaning back. And then you'd kind of memorize that, and then you could actually try it out and see how well you did on the real one that was next to you. They don't usually tell anybody about that. It's like a deep, dark secret that you have to align your butt correctly over the commode. The night before my first launch, I was Pretty excited, anticipating everything. You're in crew quarters with your crew. You're in quarantine. You do get able to see your family, whoever's cleared by the doctor. The night before, you get to eat whatever you want. I remember the lady, Dot was her name, who was had a kind of run the crew quarters down there at the Kennedy Space Center, said to me they were going to go shopping, and he asked me what I wanted for dinner. I was like, whatever you have, Dot, it's all good here. I don't care. She goes, you can have anything you want tonight. And I go, well, whatever you have is fine with me. And she looks at me and grabs my hand. She goes, honey, you're going on a rocket ship tomorrow. You can have anything you want to eat tonight. And I was like, okay, Dot, how about a steak? So you wake up and you get dressed. Usually you have a crew shirt picked out because you're going to get your picture taken as a crew at breakfast. There's a cake there. It's a kind of a tradition to have a cake, whether or not you want a piece of cake or not, but they'll have a cake there for you. Every crew member has a technician helping them that you've trained with throughout your training flow whenever you had the suit on for your training events. And so they're there and you get the suit on and get your pockets stuffed with whatever. The commander plays a hand of poker with the head of the office, the head of the astronaut office, until the commander loses to leave all your bad luck on the planet. Charlie said, Mike, come over here and join us. And I played poker with Charlie and Scooter, our commander. And one of my crewmates was like, whoa, what's going on? This is bad luck. You can't have an extra guy in there. Scooter eventually lost, and we headed to the launch pad. For me, the biggest moment of fear was before my first launch, looking at the spaceship in the night sky. It's fully fueled and making noises and water vapors coming off of it, but it looks like it's smoke coming off of it, and it looked a little intimidating. So I thought maybe this wasn't such a good idea, but by then it's too late and you have to go. So the shuttle had a flight deck with windows and instruments and stuff to look at, and there was 4 people up there. And then there were 3 of us on the mid-deck, which really not much to look at except these lockers in front of us. And we did have an altimeter to tell us what the pressure was inside of our spaceship. So all the action was on the flight deck. So we played like tic-tac-toe and rock, paper, scissors, sitting next to each other, that kind of thing. Then it's a couple minutes, and then it's 1 minute and 30 seconds, and then the spaceship is starting to come alive at that point with a couple minutes to go. They start up the auxiliary power units, and then 6 seconds the engines start, and the whole stack leans forward and then comes back. You still haven't gone anywhere yet until the solid rocket boosters, the 2 big white rockets on either side. And once they light, you're moving. You haven't yet cleared the tower, you're still going 100 miles an hour. As soon as you take off, and you accelerate from 0 to 17,500 miles an hour in about 8.5 minutes. If you feel the acceleration, the G-forces start to build up. There's a lot of shaking going on. With the solid rockets still attached, they run for 2.5 minutes, and they run rough because they're solid material. The G-forces build up to about 3 Gs, so 3 times your body weight is what you're feeling. So I felt like there were like 3 big dudes sitting on me. And then at the end of 8.5 minutes, the main engine's cut, and you're weightless. And then the feeling is just weightlessness, where there's no more forces on you. My arms just floated up like this because that happens naturally. You're kind of glad that you made it. Your first day, I didn't feel good. I threw up my first day in space. You get stomach awareness because your inner ear is trying to, your brain's trying to figure out what's going on because your inner ear works on gravity, and there's no gravity when you're in orbit affecting you. So your brain doesn't know what's going on. And so it's a conflict between the inner ear and the eyes, which leads to nausea sometimes, seasickness or air sickness, that kind of thing you might get, or in a car, that's car sickness. I was fine by the second day. My second flight, I think my brain remembered, it kicked right in, and I was okay from the get-go. But on day 3 is when we rendezvoused. You had a laser we'd shoot off for distance and speed measurements, and make sure all the computers are working, and we were getting closer. So you get it really close to the telescope. You see it like a star in the distance, at the beginning of the day, and you're getting closer and closer. The way we grabbed the telescope is we would get it with the robot arm. When you're docking with the International Space Station, it's like a docking port that docks with on one side of it on the spacecraft that's coming, and then the other side on the space station. On Hubble, you had to grab it, and then we would go to a free drift, which means that no more flying the spaceship. And that also means that you don't have that much time, because if you wait too long, the orbital mechanics of the 2 vehicles will start to separate. So you have a couple minutes to go and get it, and then we place it on a big turntable we had at the back of the space shuttle. So it would then be brought down into those latches, and we would latch it to the shuttle, and then we could remove the arm, and then we would apply power to it. We had an umbilical that would give it power, and we could get data from it and so on. So that's what we would do. Then once it's attached, it's not going anywhere, and it's powered, so it's going to stay alive, and then we're going to go start our spacewalks on day 4. Columbia was my first mission. It was in March of '02. The next launch for Columbia was STS-107 flight, and that was in January of 2003. On launch, they took some damage that they didn't know about. We didn't have a way to detect it, but they took a piece of debris off the external tank, the big fuel tank, put a hole in the wing, which they didn't know about. We didn't find this out until after with the post-flight analysis. And when they tried to re-enter the atmosphere, there was a hole in the wing. Heat came in the wing. We lost the vehicle and the crew. So that was a bad day. I knew them really well. 3 of them were classmates of mine. The others I knew really well. Ilan Ramon was an Israeli astronaut who my family and I became very close with. Still close with his kids. And then the other folks, Rick Husband was a very good friend of mine, one of my better friends, one of my best friends in the office. He was the commander. And there were 2 others from the class previous to mine. So I knew them all really well. I was actually taking my son to a Boy Scout event, and one of the parents kind of took me to the side and said they had heard something. And then I called one of my buddies who was at home and said, "Hey, turn on the TV and see what's going on." And he said, he's like, "We got to go to work." You know, when I talked to my family about it, it was, we knew it was a risky business and that this didn't add any new information, really. It was just, it wasn't like a surprise that this could happen. And in a weird way, it's kind of like, well, this happened, and it's probably not going to happen again for a while. We're going to have to be really careful and make sure it doesn't happen again. But I still wanted to go, and I got the support I needed from my family to give it another try. And I still have great confidence in NASA. Things are going to happen every once in a while where the environment is going to win, and you're going to have a bad day, unfortunately. I think that all of us try to think of everything that could go wrong and try to have a solution for it. And everything that did go wrong, we had a solution for. But there's always those things that you can't even imagine happening. And everything kind of happens, boom, 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 on that day where, there may be 10 different things that happened that are unique, but they all happened at the same time together. And that's when you have a bad day. Things happen. On the most recent mission, the Artemis II mission, there was talk about the heat shield. But they knew about that threat, and they studied and tested and did everything they could. So I was pretty convinced that there's not going to be a problem, the heat shield. They were going to have a problem. It's going to be something no one thought of. I'd be like, ooh, we didn't know that could happen. I have high confidence in the way they operate. I had the sense that on my first flight, maybe foolishly, that the major danger was over. And we made it to orbit, which was certainly in your face. You could get killed. And the spacewalks, we had to be really careful. We talked about it, that we thought the second most dangerous thing we were going to do was the spacewalks. And so, not that we shouldn't have known that entry coming back could be dangerous, it just seemed like that was not, we weren't going to have a problem with it. I was convinced we were going to be okay. And so when we had the accident, the Columbia accident, it was a reminder that you're not safe again until you're back on Earth. The Hubble spacewalks were considered to be the most complex, meaning that there was so many things you had to do. So it wasn't just built to be a telescope and sent to space. It was built to be serviced. So just about everything could be taken out of there. The solar arrays were in clamps and with connectors, so you could undo the clamp, undo the connectors, remove the solar array, put a new one in. The Hubble Space Telescope is about the size of a school bus, a standard size school bus. It's that size because it was made to be as large as it could be and still fit in the payload bay of the space shuttles. All of the instruments, some of them are the size of a refrigerator, some of them the size of a baby grand piano. All of those things could be removed by undoing some latches and some connectors, removing it very carefully, putting a new one in and taking the old one home. And that was generally the drill. It was a dream of astronomers for years to get a telescope into space, because even on the clearest night at a very high altitude where the atmosphere is thin, you're still looking through the atmosphere. When that starlight comes in, it's distorted. And that's why stars twinkle, because it's the distorting of the light. So Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star is written by someone on Earth, because when you're in space, you don't get that twinkling. They're perfect points of light. Hubble's above our atmosphere can look directly into the universe and is able to return these beautiful images. The telescope was launched back in 1990. We only go into Hubble a few times. On Space Station, there's always a crew there. They could do a spacewalk if they need it, tomorrow if something's going wrong, but there's no crew on Hubble. You only can go out for a certain amount of spacewalks. We did 5 on each one of my missions. We had 2 different teams trading off. We would get a lot of attention. Hey, we need a new tool to do this, and we would get it. Our pistol grip tool, this power tool we had, was developed for the Hubble missions, and it was used to also build the space station. Helmet cameras, see all these helmet camera views you get from these spacewalks? Well, that was a Hubble thing. They didn't have those things before, because what they used to do on Hubble is when they would close the doors, when you would work inside and close the doors, you had to do these closeout photos, which you'd physically have a camera looking around. It took a long time. So what they did is they had the idea to put cameras on your head so that as you're doing the spacewalk, they could get all the information they needed about what it looked like inside of there. And that was then turned over as well to the other missions that were not going to Hubble. So we had just about everything we needed and wanted, and there were years in the making. You wake up and the spacewalkers have first dibs on the toilet that day because there's only one toilet. So you always want to have a good breakfast because there's no food inside of the spacesuit. The only nourishment you had a 32-ounce bag of water inside of there with you. So that was it. You put your diaper on first, then you put these polypropylene underwear on to absorb your sweat, and you put some socks on, keep your feet warm. And then you put a liquid cooling garment on, which is like a fancy pair of long underwear with lots of tubes on it. And so that's to bring the cooling water over your body. You're typically more concerned about getting too hot because you're in an enclosed spacesuit that cannot leak or else you have trouble. So you have something to suck the air in to the life support system in your feet and on your arms, and that air will go in and get scrubbed for CO2 and other particles, and then the fresh air is going to come in over your head through the helmet. And then you start a pre-breathe. So in our missions, we had about 40 minutes of breathing 100% oxygen. You're going to go to a lower pressure in the suit. We lowered the pressure in the vehicle. We could do this on the shuttle, where you could lower the pressure from 14.71 atmosphere, like sea level, down to 10.2, which is like being on a tall mountain. What that does is that helps rid the body of some of its nitrogen. So you don't want to get the bends, decompression sickness. If you're in a higher pressure environment and then you immediately go to a lower pressure environment, it can lead to some neurological problems because the nitrogen in your system can cause trouble in the bloodstream, and that's not good. There's a hatch that leads to space, which is locked, or else you have a big hole in the spaceship. You don't want that. But there's the inner hatch that's open up to that point, where you got in there and everything. And then everyone says adios, and then they close the inner hatch and lock it. So now they're getting rid of all the air in the airlock until it goes down to vacuum. Those moments where you're in there with your spacewalking buddy, kind of looking at each other a little bit, just kind of waiting to go outside, thinking about maybe the first thing you're going to do, whatever. And I remember my first time looking at that hatch. And even though I'd been in space for a couple days, I felt there was a really big difference between being inside of a spaceship and going outside of it. Like, that's space out there, man. The only thing that's protecting me is my spacesuit. And it was like this door, it's like, that's the door to space. Typically, it's an experienced person and a new person. So on my first flight was a guy named Jim Newman who had spacewalked many times before in other missions. So he went out first and made sure the coast was clear, got our tethers set up, and got everything ready. The telescope is not that far away from me. It's out in the payload bay, about maybe 50 or 60 feet away from me. So it's not that far away from the airlock. Once the airlock goes to vacuum, the only thing you're hearing is what's coming over your comm cap. It's kind of peaceful. And you hear in the background, you hear like this hum. It's the air pump water separator, the thing that it's like a little fan that goes and it keeps the cooling pump going and the ventilation going. It's this miraculous small little pump. There's one spacewalker's on the robot arm, and that means the robot arm operator is going to move the spacewalker around. The other person is what we call the free floater, and they're moving around with their hands, moving around this way, and they can climb all over the place. You have a safety tether attached to the arm in case you start floating away, but that's not going to happen. So the way to get out to the telescope is you go along the side of the space shuttle. There's handrails to get you out there. And then he said, all right, Mike, you're clear to come out. And I stuck my head out of the airlock, and he's up on a handrail on the bulkhead, the forward bulkhead of the shuttle, looking down at me. He had his visor up so I could see his face. And it was, he's got this big smile on his face. And above his head is Africa. So the thought that went through my mind was, whoa, how am I going to get anything done out here? In front of me, there was a handrail for the space shuttle and the curved handrail above the airlock, and there was a foot restraint here, just like there was in the training pool. There's a vent duct coming on each side. And I was like, I know what I'm doing. I'm just going to I'm going to rely on my training here and start off that way. I mean, you're out in space, you see the planet, and it's just unbelievable. I remember the first time, one of my first tasks, the first time I was out there, got into the robot arm and went up high on the telescope. And so I was getting, taken up on the telescope, just riding along, and could see down then, as I got up high, I could see down over the wing of the shuttle, and I could see the NASA meatball and Space Shuttle Columbia name and the American flag, and looking at the planets out in the distance. And the first spacewalk I was on kind of went really well. Everything was working, and we were humming along and sticking to business, and everything was working, going according to plan. We actually got a little bit ahead. We finished everything we were supposed to a little early. You feel pretty drained. It's a mental exercise too. You're out there, you plan the spacewalk to be about 6.5 hours, and then the ones I had, I think were all longer than that, like more like around 7 and change. And it's pretty intense. Physically, I was in the best shape of my life before each one of my missions. So I was pretty well prepared physically to do these things, but still it's pretty draining. I mean, you're pretty beat when you get back in from your spacewalk, and you get out of there. You're ready to clean up and get something to eat.
What's the protocol if an astronaut starts floating away from the space shuttle?
There is a protocol if you start floating away. You always have to have your safety tether hooked up, just in case somehow you came off the structure or came out of the robot arm or something like that. Then that safety tether will take care of you. It's a titanium piece of cord. If that came undone, then you're a free flyer. Then you're out of luck, and that's never happened. But if it did, on the space station, you have a little jetpack you could fly, that you could fly back to because they can't come get you at space station. You can't undock a vehicle to come get you. It's unlikely anyway, but if you came undone, you would fly yourself. You had a little jetpack. But we didn't have that on Hubble. But if that happened, you start floating away, you become a free flyer, and you can't get back, the commander would then come and get you. Since we were spacewalking on the shuttle, you could still fly the shuttle around. He would take over the controls of the shuttle and fly it to you, so you would grab it. We called it the lost crew person procedure. And we would brief it just to go through it, because it's like an emergency. Lost crew person is what you do. But my friend Rick Linehan on my first flight had a bit of a dark sense of humor, maybe. We're in space, and he's briefing it for the first time. All these things, your tethers, this, and blah, blah, blah. And he goes, lost crew person. Don't worry about it. We got 2 more inside. So the second mission to Hubble ended up being the final mission. What we knew was going to be the final mission, and no one's been there since. And we were trying to do as much as we could. Second mission, STS-125, was in 2009, May of 2009. There were 2 instruments that had power failures, and they couldn't turn these things on, but they were great instruments, and we did not have replacements for them. One of these 2 is called the Space Telescope Imaging Spectrograph, that could do things like analyze the atmospheres of far-off planets. And they wanted to bring this capability back. Now, these things were put together over years in time, and by really conscientious engineers and technicians. Their goal was to make it so no one could ever take this apart again. It was buttoned up so that there would be no danger to it during launch. It could withstand launch and the rigors of space, and no one was ever going to open these things again. This panel had 111 small screws, each of which had a washer, and just to make sure the screws never back out, they put glue on the threads. For that task alone, over 100 new tools were designed. So I was the lead spacewalker, and I had a fellow out there with me was a new guy, Mike Good, my good buddy and a great spacewalker. So we practiced, and we practiced working together of every little step of everything we were going to do to repair the instrument. You were doing this really delicate procedure with these gloves on, and the tools are designed to make it so the gloves will work with them. So if you had a regular tool that you might be familiar with, like a crescent wrench, that thing will have an extra added handle piece to it, some special space rubber stuff that will, hard material that'll allow you to use the tool without having to have the death grip on it like you would on Earth. I felt like you're like trying to work on your car, like change the oil in the car with boxing gloves. It was the most ambitious spacewalk we've ever tried. Capture plate on there, just gets all these little screws, and to do that, we had to remove 4 screws on the outer side of this. The easiest thing I was going to do that day was remove a handrail that was used to insert the instrument years earlier. That handrail had 2 big screws at the top, 2 big hex screws at the top, and 2 big hex screws at the bottom. So we weren't worried about those screws. They were beefy. And we even used the old power tool. We didn't even need any fancy stuff. And it was just going to take like 30 seconds. There's one line in the checklist. It was so simple, we had no recourse for this. Like even I couldn't mess it up. The one at the bottom left comes loose. You know, I could feel that. The one at the bottom right is just spinning my tool. And I was like, what's going on? And I removed the tool and I look with my helmet light and I bend down and I look and it's no longer a hex head. It's a gnarled up piece of metal. And I realized, holy cow. That screw's never coming out. Handle's not coming off. 111 screws aren't coming out. We'll never replace the power supply. We're not going to bring the instrument back to life. We'll never find out if there's life in the universe, and everyone's going to blame me. That wasn't far from the situation at that moment. Before I said anything, I just kind of leaned out of the telescope because I was working in there, and I leaned out, and we were over the Pacific Ocean, and I thought to myself, I can't even get to a hardware store if I wanted to. Like I've really messed up this time. I don't know what we're going to do. And for about an hour or so, we were troubleshooting, and I didn't have any good idea. I mean, I was trying to think, what else could we remove? What other tools could we try? And could we get it from the back? And I knew it was bad because I knew the repair backwards and forwards, and I knew that there's no way to get around this. But we had a clever engineer named Jim Corbo. He thought to himself, what would he do if he was in his garage? What would you do at home? He said, sometimes brute force is the answer. He would just try to rip that thing off because it was loose at the top. You just yank it and break it. And he called over to the Goddard Space Flight Center, and they're standing by, watching this in horror that years of hours of training for this and all the development of the tools have just gone up in smoke. They were watching, and Jim told them their idea, and they came up with was the idea to pull an instrument out of a clean room, put it in the same configuration with the handrail, and they pulled on the top of the handrail with a fish scale to see how hard it would be to break that bolt at the bottom that was still there. And it broke that bolt at 60 pounds of force. Tony told me afterwards he was worried about breaking that and debris going flying and getting me or Mike. You break stuff in space, you're asking for trouble. You can shrapnel or sharp edge or something like that. If you have a projectile coming flying because you just broke a piece of metal and it hit my spacesuit or Bueno's spacesuit, it could cause a real problem. The technique they wanted us to use, which was not to just yank it, but to kind of break, like kind of just not yank the whole thing off at one, but try to like weaken it, kind of yield it a little bit, and then in a couple steps get it so it just needed a little tug at the end. It all went perfectly after that. So this spacewalk went pretty long. It was over 8 hours. But we got it all done, and they brought the instrument back to life, and I was just so happy. I remember we went back to the airlock, and Scott Altman, my commander, who's my very good friend, comes over the communication line and he says, Mass, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm just cleaning up the airlock a little bit. And he goes, is there anything you're doing now that you can't do later? And he goes, well, why don't you just go outside and enjoy the view after this, this psychic trauma that I went through breaking that bolt, stripping that bolt. And it was just so I was just able to really relax. And I just let go and took in the view. And it was a day pass. It was daytime. We were over the Pacific, kind of heading over Hawaii. And it was just magnificent, seeing the ocean and the clouds. If we didn't get that handrail removed, we would have not brought that instrument back. And it's still working today. NASA approached me and said, we have this idea to send a tweet from space. And we clearly, they asked my commander about it, and he said, okay. And they thought I was the right guy to do it for whatever reason. I was like, okay. But I didn't have a Twitter account. I wasn't paying attention to anything really except the mission at that time. First tweet from space, I didn't think about it very much. I just kind of, whatever came to mind, which wasn't much. I didn't know. I should have thought about it some more maybe, but I wrote, launch was awesome. The adventure of a lifetime has begun, something like that. And that was on a Monday. They made fun of me on Saturday Night Live. Seth Meyers was doing Weekend Update, and he said, we have the first tweet from space, and here it is. Launch was awesome. In 40 years, we've gone from one giant leap for mankind to launch was awesome. And then he went on to say, if we ever encounter life in the universe, I assume this is how I'll be notified. And it shows my Twitter thing that says, geez, dudes, aliens. So I got made fun of. My kids thought it was cool, though. The first one was a little, maybe not the best, but I think they got better. After my first mission, the space station developed the possibility, the capability of a phone call that you could make. There was an internet protocol phone. So you could call from, you can't call the space station, but the space station could call you. If you ever get a phone call, folks, and it's 281 with a 244 exchange, pick it up. It might be the space station calling. Because if you don't pick it up and they leave a message like, oh man, then you got, hey, email me, you go to email, hey, call me again, will you, And I was like, I don't know if this is such a good idea, because we're really busy. The missions, we don't have a lot of free time. The space station, you get like some time off, because you're up there, you're living up there. So our families knew we had this. So we never used it. We didn't even set the thing up. So then when we got back from my second flight, my friend was like, oh, I'm glad you're back, but why didn't you call? We set up the expectation. We had this, I knew that was a bad idea. The landing day is pretty exciting. It's kind of bittersweet because you're coming home and you've had a good mission, but you're also excited about coming home. So that's a good part of it. And you get ready that day. It's all about preparing the space shuttle to come back and get your spacesuits on, get everything set up, and go over the briefings. My first mission, this was before the Columbia accident. I know we were moving along and going through the checklist, but there wasn't the same sense of urgency or intensity. After we had the accident on entry with Columbia, then my second flight, which was after, there was a little more intense feeling, I think, about what we were facing. And we should have had that same intensity on the first flight, but for me, it wasn't there. We were coming in on kind of a sloping kind of path across the planet to come in. So it was pretty smooth, and you're landing on a runway, so that was pretty smooth as well. My first flight, we landed at the Kennedy Space Center, which is the preferred place because that's where you're going to take off. It was going to leave from the next time. My second flight, though, we had bad weather at the Kennedy Space Center, so we got a couple extra days in orbit, which was fun. But then they eventually had to bring us home, and it was still bad weather at Kennedy Space Center. So that second flight, we landed at Edwards Air Force Base in California. Weather's always good there. There were really only 3 approved runways. We had some emergency landing sites coming up the East Coast and over in other places. If you couldn't make it to space and you could make it across the Atlantic in Southern Europe and in Northern Africa, there were landing sites as well. But the primary landing sites, the primary one was the Kennedy Space Center. The second one was Edwards Air Force Base. The third one was White Sands Missile Range. You're going to feel a little off balance because now your vestibular system is kicking in again after being silent for the past 2 weeks or so. So just feeling a little off balance. You kind of walk around with your legs like Frankenstein, sort of, kind of walking around there with legs spread apart to keep your balance as best you can, and just kind of getting used to being back on the planet again. Got to be careful. Waking up your first day back on the planet, that you don't just float out of bed or try to float out of bed. I dropped a bag of groceries in the second day back in the driveway. Kind of purposely put it up here behind me and forgot where I was. Yeah. I dreamt about being an astronaut when I was 6 years old and I saw Neil Armstrong on the moon. I wanted to grow up to be just like him. He was my hero. But then I found out I was afraid of heights, and trying to grow up to be like your hero, how do you do that? That's impossible. So when I was a senior in college, I went to the movies and saw this movie, The Right Stuff, which is about the original 7 astronauts and the test pilots that came before them. And it made me want to grow up to be an astronaut again. The hardest thing about being an astronaut is getting the opportunity. Because so many qualified people are trying to get it, and it's not easy. And it's kind of out of your control to a certain extent. I applied for the class of 1990 and got rejected outright, for the class of 92 and got rejected outright. The class of 94, which ended up being the class of 95, I got an interview for that class. When you get to the interview, there are thousands of people that apply, and they typically would interview about 120 people over the course of a few months. That's a pretty big cut, and you'd come in for the physical, and a lot of people were getting DQ'd because of the eye test, and so that's what happened to me. And they said, well, there's no way to get around this. And then I was pretty disappointed, but then I started asking questions. Bob Overmeyer was a Marine Corps pilot who was my boss at McDonnell Douglas. And he said, how'd it go? And I said, I got DQ'd. And he goes, with your eyes? And I said, yeah. And he goes, you know what you got to do? I said, no. He He goes, you got to dehydrate yourself before you take that test. I was like, really? He said, yeah. I go, why is that? He goes, well, you get all the water out of the eye and it flattens the eye and it focuses differently. And he goes, that's what I used to do. He's a Marine Corps pilot, And he goes, you should try that. And I go, oh, okay, maybe there's something there. The next couple hours, that afternoon, I'm at the Johnson Space Shuttle. I'm walking through the hallway. My friend Kevin Kriegel is there. And he's an Air Force test pilot who's an astronaut. And he goes, how'd it go? I got DQ'd. He goes, your eyesight? I go, yeah. He goes, oh, that's really, he goes, you know what you got to do, don't you? And I go, what's that? He goes, you got to drink a lot of water. Can you imagine? I mean, this is the same. You can't make this up. I'm like, what? And he says, oh, it makes the eye more viscous and it bends the light. And I'm like, well, no one knows what they're doing here. So maybe there's some way to get around this. And they didn't accept I don't know if LASIK existed, but probably not even then. But there were like procedures you could have done, and that was lifetime banning. So that wasn't a good idea. When I saw the astronaut job, that was to me the opportunity of a lifetime. And I was not going to stop. I was going to, even if I couldn't get the medical issue solved, I would keep trying to get it solved. I wasn't going to give up. I found out about this training and this NASA flight docs. The doctors were like, well, we think it's hocus pocus because it's just, you just can't really train your eyes to do that, but go ahead, we don't care. It doesn't do anything to your eye. And the doctor had told me that it was the eye doctor that it was only going to work with kids. So she didn't think it was going to work, but I told her I could be really immature. And then she said, okay. She helped me and I was able to pick up a couple lines just so I could try again. The eye exercise was kind of like trying to learn how to focus beyond what you were looking at. You're kind of training your eyes to relax and almost focus beyond what they're looking at. And then the letter or the number or whatever it is that you're trying to see off a chart will come into view. And it's also other things you can do, like wearing undercorrected lenses so that your eyes are working a little bit more. It's like training the brain to just relax and kind of look beyond what it's looking at to try to have things that normally wouldn't be in focus come into focus. I'm really excited about the moon. I've been hoping we've sent people there since I became an astronaut, even before that. I was down at the launch for the Artemis II flight, and the Kennedy Space Center is unbelievable right now. And I think to realize that you would need to have been there before, like years ago. What's happened in the last few years is now you have these launches of satellites. Sometimes you have 2 launches in one day. They had over 100 launches last year. With all the communication satellites and some space probes, mainly communication satellites are going up, and then crews are going up, not all that often, but a couple times a year. They are building things. Blue Origin has a humongous building down there, and they're building a vehicle assembly building. SpaceX is for their giant Starship. It's huge. It looks futuristic, all the new buildings that are coming online, and the launch pads that they're using. And they're using them. I mean, it's like there's launches almost every day down there. So it's almost like a futuristic spaceport down there, and it's just growing. It's going to get more and more active. So I think there's a lot there. We might hear about the Artemis missions because those are very interesting to people going to the moon, but there's a lot of launches going on. Still are launches going to the International Space Station with crews, and I think the future is going to be the International Space Station, low Earth orbit. The hope is that'll get turned over to commercial space stations to utilize. When I started teaching 13 years ago, it was starting to get started, but we weren't sending people to space on commercial rockets, and now we are. Commercial spaceflight really didn't exist that much. A lot has changed. They were talking about all these things they were going to do. The commercial companies are bringing the booster back and using it again and landing it. And I was like, oh, see what happens. When I saw the first one of those landing back at the launch pad and then landing it on a barge out in the ocean at night, that is incredible. So I was really impressed with that. The reusability of it is what's going to make it affordable. The commercial space sector that has grown immensely over the past 12 years or so, and I think that's probably the biggest difference between what was going on and what I'm talking about in the classroom compared to all those years ago. The NASA program itself, we've kind of cut back. There was more astronauts when I was there, and now there are fewer astronauts who are on flight status because there's not as many of them going to space. Hopefully that That cadence will pick up a bit now that we're going to the moon, and we're still going to the space station right now. Some of the research that's been done in space on the space station has really come around. They've been able to use a microgravity environment for some great research and commercial activities. But it's a bit dangerous sending humans to these places. So whenever you can use a robotic device, I think that's a good idea. I think there's still a practical reason for people to go to space. That is that we're able to do things that robots can't do, or even with AI. We can make decisions based on experience. For example, on a planetary surface, especially the rovers on Mars, they don't go very fast and don't carry a lot of ground. Over like a period of 10 years, you can get with maybe, I don't know what the exact correlation would be, but in much less than that time, if you had a person walking around, you could cover that same ground. I'm a professor at Columbia in mechanical engineering, and I teach classes that are related to spaceflight, Introduction to Human Spaceflight, Aerospace Human Factors. I teach Art of Engineering, which is for new students, and for the mechanical engineering section, we build rockets. We just launched them last weekend. That was kind of fun. So I teach those classes. I advise the Space Club, which is quite active. We have 500 students, about 250 or so are active, doing different projects from rockets to spaceflight experiments to high altitude balloons to all kinds of things. So that's pretty enjoyable. We're starting an aerospace program there. We have a minor, and we're starting a major in aerospace engineering, so we're taking the first steps for that. I've got my first book, Spaceman, is more of a memoir, and then it is a memoir. New York Times bestseller, did well. I also have a junior, like a young reader version of that. And then I have another book, Moonshot, which came out more recently. It's kind of like my top 10 lessons learned as an astronaut. It's more in the self-help space. If NASA calls me tomorrow to go to the moon, my answer is yes. But I can guarantee you they won't be calling. So I'm going to be staying here, I think, on the planet.
Hi, I'm a producer and Authorized account. If you enjoyed this video, then please subscribe and comment with more topics that you'd like us to cover in this series.